So hey guys, we're back, or at least I'm back. Zach is off at the Penn State Board of Trustees meeting, so he can't be here to talk about Penn State, but I think I can cover the bases pretty well for him. Actually, as I'm recording this, Penn State's Board of Trustees just approved the plans for the Lasch building renovations. That was sort of expected. Nothing really new came out of that, but it's another step forward. Some of the renovations should be done relatively soon. They were funded by private gifts. Much of what Penn State's going to do to the Lasch building in terms of branding and reconfiguring the locker room and upgrading a lot of things will come from a combination of donor gifts and as well as other athletic funds. But that is very much down the road. Penn State at this point is coming off of a bye week preparing for Michigan in terms of their schedule and their record, coming off of a 23-21 loss to Northwestern. That was really a game that you could look at a couple different ways. I mean, on the one hand, Penn State didn't look very good to start really that whole first half, or at least the first quarter. Penn State looked very, very disjointed. A team that wasn't really sure about what it was trying to do. Then, Saquon Barkley finds the end zone. They kind of get things going a little bit, but you give up a long kickoff return for a touchdown right after Saquon Barkley's score. Penn State goes from being down just a touchdown to being down 20-7 at the half in a very different sort of game on the road against a ranked opponent. When you look at the second half, on the other hand, you can say that this is a team that sort of learned how to turn things around in the middle of a game, which is often a lot harder than you might imagine. Penn State goes on to score 14 straight points, takes a 21-20 lead, has the lead late into the fourth quarter, has the lead into the game's final minute. But Northwestern drives down the field, kicks a game-winning field goal. Penn State gets, just a few seconds to try and get a kickoff return back for a score, and obviously that doesn't happen. So on the one hand, you can look at this game and say Penn State didn't look very prepared from the start. They couldn't close out. Penn State has a tendency over the past 2 years under James Franklin to struggle with these late-game situations. You look at the Maryland game, you look at the Illinois loss. These are all games where Penn State had the lead late and lost it in the final minute of regulation or in the final minutes of regulation. And you go, yes, Penn State's a program coming off of the sanctions, but if you're able to have a lead or you're able to gain the lead at least in the 59th minute or have a lead through 59 minutes, you like to be able to think that you can hang on for one more minute, and that's been an issue that Penn State has struggled with. Certainly there have been a lot of different circumstances that have led up to those things. It's not as easy as just saying, well, we have the lead, so now let's just go win the game. But certainly, when you look at the way that Penn State's lost some games and just the simple fact that they could have a much better record under James Franklin if they could win some of these close games, you feel like they've definitely left a lot of victories on the field. They've definitely left a lot of opportunities on the field. At the same time, you look at how that game closes out. Grant Haley has an interception in his hands and he drops it. That interception would have effectively ended the game and Penn State would have won. But that didn't happen. Northwestern continues to drive down the field, gets the game-winning field goal, and that is that. So on the one hand, you have your opportunities. On the other hand, you can't make the most of them, and that's really why Penn State sits with the record that it has. Very much a what-if season, but at the same time, it seems sort of fair for a team that hasn't been very consistent, a team that has looked very good at times and very poor at times. So ultimately, you're not going to win all of the games that you feel like you should have when you play like that. And that's sort of what you're seeing from Penn State so far this season. So looking ahead to this week, Penn State hosts Michigan. It's a noon kick on Saturday. Should be interesting. There's going to be more security there after all the things that have happened in Paris. Between a noon kick, longer security measures, it'll be interesting to see how early people get to the game, how long it takes everyone to get in, and when the crowd finally arrives. Add in the fact that you don't know who's going to stay as far as students because next week is Thanksgiving. There's a lot of different factors that play into the crowd element, but on the field, this should be an interesting game. Michigan comes in ranked 14th, just 2 losses, one to Utah to open up the season on the road against a pretty good Utah team, and then obviously the almost difficult, impossible to describe last-second loss to Michigan State with a blocked punt return for a touchdown. Really one of the crazier things that's happened this year in college football. I was actually in Ohio Stadium when it happened, just got off the elevator, looked over to the TV to see the final play of the game, and the place went nuts. It was incredible. It was one of the more, I was so glad that I saw it live because it was such an amazing sort of thing to happen. So unbelievable. 10 seconds left. Michigan's punting. You figure this is essentially the last play of the game outside of a great return or a last-second Hail Mary, but it was the last play of the game. But Michigan State won in the most unexpected way possible. To Michigan's credit, the Wolverines have had a great defense all year. They're only allowing 14.8 points a game, which is among the best in the nation. At the same time, they're scoring lots and lots of points as of late, averaging 32.6. They've been a team that can shut out teams. They had 3 straight games where they shut out opponents and scored a lot of points in the process. These were not ugly games. These were dominating wins on both sides of the ball. But over the past 5 games, past 4 games specifically, Michigan has been a team that people have been able to figure out a little bit better. Minnesota takes Michigan down to the wire, takes them down to the goal line with a reasonable amount of time left on the clock and can't punch it in, so Michigan survives. Michigan goes on next week to take care of business against Rutgers, and then last week picks up a double overtime victory against Indiana in a game where Indiana had a few shots at the end to win it themselves. So the Wolverines are a team where you feel like if you can get them on the right day and you can figure out what you need to do to move the ball and score, you have an opportunity to really give them a run for their money. I think Michigan has done a great job under Jim Harbaugh getting Jake Rudock comfortable at quarterback. He has actually pretty similar numbers to Christian Hackenberg. He has 5 more interceptions, 1 more touchdown, and just over 220 yards more than Hackenberg. Obviously, his season has maybe gone a little better than Hackenberg's has in the win-loss column and maybe the perception column. But ultimately, Rudock is not a guy who is airing it out and throwing for 1 million more yards than Hackenberg or doing anything that Hackenberg can't do. At the same time, I think everyone knows that when Christian is on his game, he's as good as anyone in the country, which means that when Jake Rudock is on his game, he too is quite a formidable foe to have to go up against and slow down. But ultimately, I think this game comes down to, can Penn State score points? I don't think there's any doubt that Penn State's defense will be able to slow down Michigan enough times to give their offense the opportunity to stay in the game. But if Michigan comes out with a really good defensive attack like they have the past few weeks, if they're able to come out with a consistent offensive effort and move the ball down the field, it could be a short day for Penn State. But at the same time, it's senior day, it's a whiteout. It could very well be Christian Hackenberg's last game in Beaver Stadium. There are a lot of things on the line for both teams. Michigan is looking to try and find a way to win themselves into the Big Ten title picture, or rather win themselves into the Big Ten title game. Penn State actually has an opportunity to do that as well. If they finish this season 2-0, Ohio State loses to Michigan State and Michigan, Penn State would win the tiebreaker against all of the teams in the conference and go on to face probably Iowa in the Big Ten title game. That being said, that's sort of a long shot situation, but you never know. Sparty has always played Ohio State tough, a very good team. If Penn State can find a way to beat Michigan, then it just comes down to Michigan beating Ohio State and Penn State beating Michigan State. If Connor Cook has injury issues at quarterback for Michigan State that linger after playing Ohio State, Penn State's got an opportunity to pull off that upset, but that is very far away, at least conceptually, even if it's only another week down the road from actually happening. Nevertheless, it should be a good game, should be an interesting game. I'm not sure how I think it's going to play out. I think probably what will happen is Penn State is underdog by 5 points in Las Vegas. I think Michigan will either have this game in hand by halftime, or Penn State will take it down to the wire like Michigan has gone down to the wire the past few weeks. How that all shakes out will depend on a lot of factors that we really don't know answers to. Who's kicking field goals? How is that going? What does Christian Hackenberg look like? How is the defense playing? At the end of the day, I think Michigan's probably a better put-together team at this point in the season with a little bit more to play for and a more realistic shot at getting to their goals. So I think Michigan probably wins. I think it might be closer than people anticipate, but at the same time, I think it's very easy if you come into that game expecting Michigan to maybe pull away midway through the game to see that happening as well. But you never know. Big games are always fun because I think every time you see people go and say, well, this game's going to be a shootout or this game's going to be a defensive battle, almost always it seems like the opposite thing happens. So if I say that it's going to be a high-scoring game and Penn State might win, then it'll probably be a low-scoring game and Michigan will win. So you just never know. But it should be fun. Noon kick, last home game of the season for Penn State. And it kicks off, I don't remember the network, but the game will definitely be on TV and you'll be able to watch it. So before I go, I'll answer a couple questions from online. The first one is essentially, what does Penn State's record look like if Christian Hackenberg decides not to go pro this season? Or when the season is over, does he declare for the draft? And if he doesn't, how does that impact Penn State's future for next year? And that's a good question. And I think I don't think that Christian's coming back. So in a lot of ways, it doesn't really matter what I think in terms of how the season will go if he was around. But at the same time, Penn State's going to host Iowa. They're going to host Michigan State. They're going to host Ohio State. On the road at Pitt. On the road at Michigan. There are a lot of big games on this schedule. For as much as Penn State's schedule this season has been somewhat underwhelming in terms of home games, there are a lot of home games next year that pose big opportunities to pick up big marquee, those sort of elusive ranked team victories that Penn State hasn't been able to get in the past few years, or at least under James Franklin. So obviously, if you can bring back a guy in his senior year with a lot of experience in a comfortable setting where he feels comfortable playing, you've got to feel pretty good about your chances of playing better than, say, you put in a guy who's never started before. So I don't think there's any doubt that Christian is probably good for a few victories on the schedule. But at the same time, it's hard to see him coming back. It's hard to really embrace that as a possibility just because things have been so up and down for him the past few years. His stock is probably not going to be any higher than it was, and it's probably only ever going to go down from where it is right now. So ultimately, it's probably in his own best interest to go pro. And at the end of the day, Penn State football might be better off moving towards a type of quarterback that's more suited for the offense and really transitioning more into an offense that fits exactly what James Franklin and John Donovan are trying to do. The other question, 150 recruits coming to town this week, or at least around them. Those numbers are always sort of ambiguous. Everyone reports them high. Some kids don't show up that morning because it's a noon kick and it's hard to get to State College for a noon kick. Maybe the weather is bad, or you get car trouble, or you just can't get there. So it always waffles around to actually whatever the reported number is, but definitely it's a big recruiting weekend. And the question is really, how do games like this impact the recruiting landscape? And I think it really comes down to, when you talk to guys that cover recruiting a lot more and a lot more in depth than I do, that it really comes down to the experience. It's not so much about whether Penn State or Michigan wins that specific game. It's much more about, what is it like to go to a game at Penn State? What is it like to be on campus during a game day? What are the teammates like? What is it like to be around the coaching staff? A lot of these things where it really doesn't matter what happens on the field. It's more about what your experience is like when you're at the stadium, when you're on campus. At the same time, if Penn State blows Michigan out, I'm sure that will help the experience in one way. And I'm sure if Michigan were to blow Penn State out, that would hurt Penn State's recruiting experience in a different way. So while it doesn't matter if Penn State wins or loses, I do think that how the game goes on the field does play a little bit into the whole experience of the trip. Ultimately, you're going to host 150 recruits. A lot of them are going to be friends of recruits that Penn State's really trying to recruit, really trying to target. Some of these guys are never going to get an offer. Some of them are here because Penn State sort of opens their doors to these sorts of situations where they have big moments and big games and says, come be a part of this experience. So really, the target area that Penn State's probably focusing on is much smaller than 150 recruits. I mean, obviously, you can't take them all. You can only take 25, and Penn State's classes fill up quickly, so a lot of these guys will never hear back from Penn State necessarily. That being said, anytime that you can sort of increase your brand awareness, so to speak, and sort of spread your message out throughout high school football players, what they're thinking about, what's on their mind, the more you're going to be able to be winning the hearts and minds, so to speak, of these kids as you try and recruit them. So it's a big weekend. There's no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to much more about what it's like to be on campus and be at a game than how Penn State does on the field, which is really the big question this week. It could be a close game. It could be a blowout, and nobody really knows. But looking forward to finding out, looking forward to seeing how the Big Ten title picture shapes up after this weekend. It'll be interesting. If Ohio State loses and Penn State wins, you go into that final weekend with a little bit more to play for than maybe people anticipated. Penn State will need some help, but it's an interesting circumstance to be a part of. So it shall be interesting to see how the next 2 weeks goes. Zach will be back next week as we talk about Penn State's game against Michigan as they prepare to go to East Lansing for the final game of the regular season against the Spartans before getting ready for bowl season. But that's all for this week. I'm Ben. Zach says hi from wherever he is, and we will see you guys later.